Alright, welcome back to the Lua introduction, and in this lecture we're going to talk about the math library. Now, we already talked about math operations, so we talked about adding, subtracting, and so on, but now we're going to talk about the math library. So those are functions that can help us do some mathematics. So first of all, let's think about something like this. We can print out -5, right? That's totally fine. And when we print this out, -5 appears here down in the output. This is no mystery, but what if we actually don't want the negative sign in front of it? What we actually want is we want the absolute value. Well, we can use this math, and then we can hit a dot to see the functions in it. And as you can see, there are a whole bunch of functions in here. And this math.abs, so this is the absolute value of something. So if we put in the -5, then we're actually going to get a normal 5 because this is the absolute value. Maybe you've heard of that before in math. It can be useful sometimes because maybe we don't want to know necessarily whether or not something is negative. We only want to know what the value is. And this is something the absolute value could be used for. The next thing is going to be rounding up and down. Now, the way we can do this is by using math.ceil. So ceil, basically a shortening for ceiling. And this rounds up to the next whole number. Very important, right? So when this rounds up to the next whole number, we would imagine an 11 to be printed out. And an 11 is printed out. That's pretty good. And next thing, very similar to this, is going to be math.floor. And let's just put in the same number. And this now rounds down to the next whole number, right? So this one we would then expect to be a 10. Let's run this. And as we can see, 11, and then afterwards a 10. That's great. So those are ceil and floor. Can also be really useful for a little bit of mathematics. Now, two functions that are incredibly useful, and they are actually used a lot, is the min function. So let's just put in 5 and 20, for example, and this simply returns the smallest number given as parameter. That's it. So in this case, we have given it a 5 and a 20, and this is going to return a 5 then. There you go. And the same thing, and we're just going to copy this one time, and we're going to write, instead of min, we're going to write max, because of course there's also a max function, and this is going to be the biggest number then, right? So this is going to return a 20 in this case. Yeah, here we go. Right, also, just some random things. Let's say maybe you want to use pi ever. You can just use math.pi instead of using your own pi. It's quite accurate, actually. It's more accurate than I could go for from my head, so that's pretty good. And then if you ever want to use the square root, you can use math.sqrt square root. Let's say from 25. So that's just going to be a 5 right here. Right, there are also some other ones which I'm not going to go into. So there are some sine and cosine, tan functions which you could use. Those are the trigonometric functions. We're not going to go into those. If you ever need them, they are there, however. And however, the big one that we're going to look at is going to be the random function, math.random. And this is going to be a really, really useful one. So this one, it returns a random number between 0 and 1. So let's just see what happens here. As you can see, this is 0.04 and then a whole bunch of other stuff down there. Now, the great thing about this random, when we just copy this, we can actually, and this is the great thing, we can actually give it a lower and an upper bound. And this is incredibly powerful because we can actually say, well, lower and upper bound can be given. So this is now going to return a number between 0 and 100. Both of those are inclusive. So let's see, 66, and then let's run again. Then we're going to have 64, and then we're going to have 21, And one more time for good measure, 88. Wow, okay, there you go. So those are some math library functions that can be really useful. And yeah, I think that one of the ones that is going to be used the most often probably is random, simply because of the idea when you are making a game, random numbers are your favorite thing to go to. As a quick note, once again, of course, those are only pseudo random numbers. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter, but you might have heard once or twice that computers can't really do real randomness. And what happens here is that when we do a math.random, as you can see, we actually give it a seed, right? We can give it a seed. And there you see that it sets a seed for the pseudo random number generator. So the idea is that when we set a seed, it's always going to produce the same numbers when we ask them to. So if we set the seed for 100, for example, and we run this, we get 0.64 and 42. That's a great random number, by the way. And then if we run this again, it's the same, because we have set the seed in the same. So you might have seen this in other games. You've maybe played Minecraft, has a seeding system, right? So if you put in the same seed, you're gonna get the same world. And for example, I don't know, Binding of Isaac has seeds, and then it generates the same random game. And this is basically the idea here, is that when you give it the same seed, the random numbers are always going to be the same. So the sequence is going to be the same, right? So if I now call this, 80 more times, all 80 numbers are going to be the same in the same configuration and the same sequence, basically, right? So that's also important to know, that the random seed is something you can set. Usually it is already set on its own, and you don't really need to worry about it in general, right? Right, so that was the math library. If there are any questions about it, of course, feel free to ask. And yeah,